In this lesson, we will look at some words and phrases from the story of the Golden Goose. But before we look at some new words, let's begin by reviewing some words from our previous stories that we also saw in this story. Do you remember when we talked about giving answers in the story of the wolf and the 7 little kids? Characters would nod their head to say yes or shake their heads to say no. In today's story, when Dumpling asks his father to let him go cut wood, his father finally says yes. Instead of just saying he said yes, we can use a more B1 level word. We can say agreed. His father agreed to let him go. But what if someone says no? We can say they disagree. So he disagreed. So now we have two ways of saying yes and saying no. We have nodding the head and agree to say yes, and we have shaking the head or disagree to say no. We can add one more way to say yes or no that we learned in The Wolf and the 7 Little Kids. Saying yes or nodding your head or agreeing also means you accept. You accept what someone is saying or asking of you. If you do not accept or say no, shake your head, or disagree, this means you refuse what someone is saying or asking of you. Great work. Now let's look at some new words in the story of the Golden Goose. When Dumpling's older brothers go into the forest, they each have delicious sweet cake. The little gray man asks for a small piece, but the brothers refuse because they want it all for themselves. We can describe the brothers as greedy. Greedy means you don't want to share or give other people your things. Let's talk a bit more about the cakes. Dumpling's brothers got fancy sweet cakes. Maybe they had strawberries and cream on top, like in the picture. But Dumpling got a plain cake. Plain is an adjective that means simple, basic, or with nothing extra added to it. Look at the second picture. A plain cake has no strawberries, no frosting, and no extra sugar. But because Dumpling has a kind heart, he shares his plain cake, and it magically turns into a sweet cake. And he is rewarded with the Golden Goose. He takes this goose to find a place to sleep. Dumpling needs a hotel for the night, but long ago, people didn't stay in modern hotels. They used to stay in an inn. Inn is an old-fashioned word for a small hotel in the countryside where travelers can eat and sleep. And who runs the inn? The innkeeper. This is a person's job. An innkeeper is a person who manages the hotel. Now, the innkeeper has 3 curious daughters, and they cause a huge problem because of our next word. So, the daughters want a golden feather from the goose, but the moment they touch the goose, they get stuck. Stuck is a verb that means attached to something, so tightly that you cannot move away, like what happens when you use glue. The girls are stuck to the goose and to each other all night. The next morning, Dumpling walks down the street, dragging these 3 girls behind him. Do you remember who they pass on the road? they walked past a priest. A priest is a man who stands in a church and teaches. This is another job. The priest tries to pull the girls away, but guess what? When he touches them, he gets stuck as well. And now the priest is running down the road, stuck to these three girls. Eventually, a total of 7 people get stuck together, and they arrive at the king's palace, making the serious princess laugh out loud. But the king doesn't want Dumpling to marry his daughter, so he creates some impossible challenges. First, the king says Dumpling must find a man who can drink a whole cellar of wine. A cellar is an underground storage room below a house or a castle. Dumpling brings his magically thirsty friend into the cellar, and his friend empties all the barrels. So the king sets a second challenge, a food challenge. The king bakes a large amount of bread. He bakes so much that the story calls it a mountain of bread. Many words and phrases can have two different meanings, a literal meaning and a figurative meaning. This happens a lot in English, and knowing the difference between literal and figurative can really push your level from A2 to B1. A literal meaning is when I use a word and its physical meaning is exactly what I mean. For example, if I use the word mountain literally, I mean a mountain in nature, made of rock and earth that we can climb. But if I use the word mountain figuratively, I'm using it to describe how big something is, or a large quantity of something. For example, a mountain of bread. In our story, Dumpling's hungry friend eats the entire figurative mountain, meaning a very large amount of bread. After that, Dumpling wins the princess, and they live happily ever after. Now let's review what we learned today. Answer the questions with words from the story. You can use the comment sections to post your answers. And of course, here are the answers. Thanks for watching. Now that you understand these words, watch the story again and see how much more you understand. Or continue with your next story.